Long before we had smartphones, influencers, or self-help podcasts, there was a man who walked the streets of Athens barefoot. He owned almost nothing, not even certainty. His name was Socrates, and 2.5 millennia later, we still talk about him as if he never really died. Socrates was not a prophet, not a priest, not even a teacher in the usual sense. He claimed to know nothing, yet everyone who met him left shaken, sometimes enlightened, sometimes furious. He was Athens' gadfly, the buzzing nuisance that refused to let the proud and powerful fall asleep in their self-satisfaction. And if he could look at us today, a world drowning in noise, consumption, and shallow opinion, he would probably sigh and say, "I warned you." Socrates lived in the 5th century BCE at the height of Athens' glory. It was the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, theater, art, and empire, the Silicon Valley of the ancient world. Everyone in Athens believed they were free, wise, and civilized, but Socrates saw something troubling beneath the marble and rhetoric. He saw people chasing wealth and reputation, not wisdom. He saw politicians who could sway crowds with flattery, but didn't understand justice. He saw citizens who thought freedom meant doing whatever they pleased, not understanding that the hardest kind of freedom is mastery over oneself. He saw a society very much like ours, brilliant on the surface, hollow underneath, and he decided to dedicate his life to exposing that hollowness. There's a phrase that sums up everything Socrates stood for. It was inscribed at the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, "Know thyself." For Socrates, this was not a slogan for introspection, it was a commandment for life. To know oneself meant to recognize the limits of one's knowledge, the fragility of one's desires, and the responsibility one bears for one's soul. He believed that most human misery comes not from bad luck, but from ignorance, not knowing who we are or what we truly need. We chase pleasure thinking it will make us happy. We pursue wealth thinking it will make us free. We seek recognition thinking it will make us real. And in all of that, we forget the self that seeks. Socrates called this moral ignorance, the kind that makes a person think they're wise when they are not. He believed that wisdom begins not in knowing, but in admitting ignorance. As he famously said, "I know that I know nothing." To most people, this sounded like madness or irony, but it was neither. It was humility, the first step toward genuine wisdom, because to know nothing is to become teachable, and to be teachable is to begin the long, slow journey toward truth. Unlike the professors who came after him, Socrates never wrote a single word. He didn't stand behind a lectern or charge fees like the sophists, the celebrity tutors of his time. He preferred the streets, the markets, the public squares. He would stop a soldier, a merchant, or a politician and ask them simple, devastating questions. What is justice? What is courage? What is love? What is a good life? At first, his questions seemed easy, but soon his victims would tie themselves in knots, realizing they couldn't define the very things they claimed to understand. They would become angry, embarrassed, defensive. That was exactly the point. Socrates didn't want to humiliate them. He wanted to expose the illusions we build around ourselves. The illusion of knowledge, the illusion of virtue, the illusion of certainty. This process became known as the Socratic method, a kind of philosophical midwifery. Just as a midwife helps a mother give birth, Socrates helped minds give birth to truth. He didn't give answers, he delivered insight through discomfort, because truth, he believed, must be born from struggle. At the core of Socrates' philosophy was a radical idea. Virtue is knowledge, not moral knowledge, not a list of rules or commandments, but a deep understanding of what is truly good. He believed that if we genuinely knew the good, we would automatically do it. People only act unjustly out of ignorance, out of confusion about what happiness really means. To Socrates, the good life was not about possessions, pleasures, or honors. It was about cultivating the soul, making it orderly, disciplined, and harmonious. Virtue was a kind of inner health. And just as we wouldn't feed our bodies poison, we shouldn't feed our souls lies, vanity, or greed. But here's the problem. It's far easier to buy things than to improve one's soul. It's far easier to collect opinions than to cultivate wisdom. Athens didn't want to hear about virtue. It wanted comfort, entertainment, and power. Does that sound familiar? Socrates often said that his mission began when the oracle of Delphi declared, "No man is wiser than Socrates." Shocked, he set out to disprove it. He questioned politicians, poets, generals, all the so-called experts, and he found that each of them thought they were wise, but none could truly justify their beliefs. They had opinions, not knowledge. They had confidence, not clarity. He realized that human beings have a natural disease, a tendency to confuse opinion with truth, appearance with reality. We love being right more than being real. We build our lives around comforting lies rather than uncomfortable truths. And so, Socrates became a living antidote to that disease. He questioned everything, not to destroy, but to purify, because he believed that an unexamined life is not just unwise, it's unworthy of a human being. The unexamined life is not worth living. It's one of the most quoted lines in philosophy, and also one of the most misunderstood. Socrates wasn't saying that only philosophers deserve to live. He meant that life without reflection, without questioning why we do what we do, becomes a form of sleepwalking. He saw Athens full of people sleepwalking, chasing wealth, gossiping about politics, competing for honor, fearing death, never stopping to ask why. And when you never ask why, you can be manipulated by anything, by fashion, by politicians, by advertising, by fear. A life without examination becomes a life lived by others' scripts. To examine oneself is to wake up. It's to take ownership of your mind. And in a noisy, distracted world, that's the most radical act there is. But Athens didn't take kindly to being awakened. The city that prided itself on freedom could not tolerate a man who made people think freely. Socrates was eventually accused of corrupting the youth and impiety, of disrespecting the city's gods. But what he had really done was expose the hypocrisy of its leaders. He showed that democracy without virtue becomes mob rule, that freedom without wisdom is chaos. In a sense, Socrates was tried for forcing people to look in the mirror, and no society likes a mirror when it shows what it doesn't want to see. At his trial, Socrates could have begged for mercy. He could have played the victim or flattered the judges. Instead, he defended philosophy itself. He told the jury that he was a gift from the gods, a gadfly sent to sting the lazy horse of Athens into self-awareness. He reminded them that comfort breeds decay, and that questioning is the soul's way of staying alive. He said, "I would rather die having spoken after my manner than speak in your manner, and live." In the end, the city condemned him to death by poison, hemlock, and even as he drank it, he didn't flinch. He told his friends that no evil can happen to a good man, because virtue is untouched by fortune. He faced death the same way he faced life, with calm understanding and inner freedom. Socrates didn't just die for philosophy, he died for a way of living that we are still struggling to learn. His warnings echo through history, and they sound eerily familiar today. He warned that people would trade truth for comfort, that societies would reward appearance over substance, that power would belong not to the wise, but to the loud, that people would spend their lives chasing distractions instead of meaning. He saw that most people don't actually want freedom, they want approval. And he saw how easily a society that worships opinion can destroy its own conscience. He would look at our social media feeds, our consumer culture, our obsession with fame, and see the same sickness that plagued Athens, a world more concerned with looking good than being good. Know thyself. Today, that phrase feels almost impossible. How can we know ourselves when we are surrounded by algorithms that know us better than we do? How can we hear the voice of our conscience when every second is filled with notifications and noise? Socrates believed that self-knowledge begins in silence, in listening to the daimonion, the inner voice that whispers, "No, don't do that." It wasn't a divine command, it was conscience. But conscience needs space to speak. When our lives are constant motion, scrolling, buying, comparing, that space disappears. We become strangers to ourselves. We start to measure our worth by numbers, likes, followers, net worth. But Socrates would remind us that no external measure can define a soul. The soul's value is internal. It's measured by how it relates to truth, to goodness, to itself. Modern culture tells us that happiness is something to be achieved, a product, a destination, a reward. Socrates saw it differently. He believed happiness, eudaimonia, is not a mood but a way of being. It's the natural outcome of a virtuous soul, a soul in harmony with itself and the world. To live justly is to live happily. That's why, for Socrates, virtue wasn't an optional moral accessory when it was the art of living well. If you want joy, cultivate justice. If you want peace, seek truth. If you want freedom, master your desires. This is the opposite of consumerism, which tells us that happiness can be bought, downloaded, or achieved through self-image. Socrates would say the happiest person is the one who needs the least, not the one who has the most. Socrates once said, "Be as you wish to seem." He understood that humans crave appearance. We want to seem, kind, wise, attractive, successful. But behind the performance, we rarely ask what those qualities truly mean. Our culture is obsessed with seeming. We curate ourselves, advertise our virtues, and confuse visibility with value. We call this connection, but it's often just performance. Socrates warned against this centuries ago. He saw that a society built on appearances eventually loses its sense of truth. When everyone is performing, no one is learning. When everyone is right, no one grows. He tried to teach that humility, not confidence, is the beginning of wisdom, and that wisdom, not popularity, is the foundation of a good society. If Socrates lived now, he probably wouldn't have a YouTube channel or a brand. He'd still be walking the streets, or maybe scrolling through comment sections, asking people uncomfortable questions. He'd ask the influencer, "Do you love your followers or their attention?" He'd ask the politician, "Do you serve the people or your ambition?" He'd ask all of us, "Are you living by your values or by your fears?" And he'd do it not to shame us, but to help us wake up, to reclaim our own minds from the noise, because that's what virtue really means. Not moral perfection, but constant awareness. Virtue is the daily practice of questioning your motives, your habits, your desires, not to judge them, but to understand them. In a world obsessed with hot takes and confidence, it's radical to say, "I don't know." But Socrates built his entire philosophy on that sentence. To admit ignorance is not weakness, it's courage. Because the moment you say, "I don't know," you open yourself to learning. And learning is what makes us human. Most of our suffering comes from pretending to know, pretending to be certain about what's right, what's wrong, what we deserve, who we are. But certainty is the enemy of growth. Socrates invites us to live in the tension, to ask, to doubt, to seek. He didn't give us doctrines, he gave us a method. The courage to question, the humility to listen, and the wisdom to keep searching. When Socrates was condemned, his friends begged him to escape. He refused. He believed that it is better to suffer injustice than to commit it, because doing wrong harms the soul, and the soul is all that truly belongs to us. That was his final lesson. Our real home is not our city, our wealth, or even our body. It is our soul. And if we betray that for comfort or fear, we lose everything that makes life worth living. He drank the hemlock peacefully. Plato wrote that his last words were a reminder to offer a sacrifice, not to beg the gods, but to thank them for the gift of philosophy, for the gift of seeing life clearly. We've built a world Socrates could hardly imagine, full of miracles of technology and knowledge, but the core human problems haven't changed. We still confuse intelligence with wisdom, information with understanding, comfort with happiness. We still run from silence, from self-examination, from the slow and difficult work of virtue. He warned that if we don't know ourselves, others will define us, that if we don't cultivate virtue, power will corrupt us, that if we don't question society, society will consume us. And maybe if Socrates walked among us today, he'd look around and say, "You've conquered the world, but lost yourselves." Today, to live like Socrates doesn't mean wearing sandals or arguing in the marketplace. It means living awake. It means questioning your assumptions before questioning others. It means caring more about being good than seeming good. And it means seeing wisdom not as possession but as pursuit. To live Socratically is to keep the dialogue open within yourself and with the world, to turn your attention inward without turning away from others, to make peace not by ignoring conflict, but by understanding it. And above all, to keep asking the questions that matter. What is justice? What is love? What is enough? Who am I? Really? Socrates' revolution was not fought with weapons or slogans. It was fought with words, questions, and integrity. And yet, it shook an empire. He taught that philosophy is not an academic game, it's a way of life. It's the art of caring for the soul in a world that constantly distracts it. It's the courage to think for yourself, even when it's dangerous. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you ask why instead of following the crowd, every time you choose honesty over comfort, you keep that revolution alive. Socrates tried to warn us, not against technology or capitalism or politics, but against forgetting ourselves. He saw that societies rise and fall not from lack of progress, but from lack of virtue. That people lose their freedom not when they are oppressed, but when they stop thinking. He told us that truth begins where certainty ends, and that wisdom begins where pride dies. He showed that happiness is not found in possessions, but in the health of the soul. And he proved with his life and his death that the examined life may be difficult, but it's the only life that truly belongs to us. 24 centuries later, his voice still echoes through every conversation that seeks truth over victory, through every mind brave enough to doubt itself, through every act of conscience that defies the crowd. Socrates didn't leave us answers. He left us questions and the courage to ask them. He warned us that if we lose that courage, we lose ourselves. But if we keep it alive, if we dare to know ourselves, we might still become what he believed we could be. Not perfect, but wise.